When your husband is one of the most powerful men in North Korea and he suddenly dies, you'd think you'd be protected for life. You'd be wrong. Because in the Kim dynasty, widows don't get sympathy, they get erased. North Korea isn't just a country, it's a family business. And like any family business, there are rules. Unspoken rules, dangerous rules, rules that determine who lives and who disappears. And if you're a woman who married into the inner circle, who spent years by the side of a powerful man, who knew all the secrets, who attended all the meetings, who saw everything, you might think you're safe. You might think your position is secure. But the moment your husband dies, everything changes. Your protection vanishes. Your status means nothing. And suddenly, you're the most dangerous person in the room. Because you know too much. You've seen too much. And dead men's wives are liabilities, not assets. This is the story of what happens to the widows of North Korea's elite, the women who married generals, advisors, and members of the Kim family itself. The women who thought they were untouchable until they weren't. Let's start with understanding how power works in North Korea, because it's not like other countries. It's not a democracy where leaders are elected. It's not even a normal dictatorship where the military holds power. North Korea is a monarchy disguised as a communist state. It's been ruled by 3 generations of the Kim family: Kim Il-sung, the founder, Kim Jong-il, his son, and Kim Jong-un, his grandson. And around these 3 men, there's always been an inner circle: generals, advisors, ministers, party officials. These are the people who actually run the country, who make the decisions, who have access to resources, who live in luxury while the rest of the country starves. And many of these powerful men have wives, women who, by marriage, become part of the elite. They live in special compounds in Pyongyang. They shop in stores that regular North Koreans can't access. They eat imported food. They wear designer clothes smuggled in from China and Europe. They have servants, drivers, security guards. They attend parties with other elite families. Their children go to special schools. They live a life that's completely disconnected from the reality of ordinary North Koreans. But here's the thing about power in North Korea. It's not permanent. It's not guaranteed. And it's definitely not inherited by women. When a powerful man dies in North Korea, his power dies with him. It doesn't transfer to his wife. It doesn't protect his family. Because in North Korea's system, power comes from proximity to the Kim family, from personal relationships with the supreme leader, from your current usefulness. And a widow? A widow is no longer useful. She's just someone who knows too much, someone who's seen the inner workings of the regime, someone who might talk, someone who might become a problem. So what happens to these women? Where do they go? What becomes of them? That's what we're going to explore. And trust me, it's darker than you think. Before we get into specific stories, we need to understand how the North Korean elite operates. Because this isn't just about individual women. It's about a system that's been in place for 70 years. At the very top, you have the Kim family, the supreme leader and his immediate relatives. These are the only people in North Korea who have absolute power, who can't be touched, who will never face consequences. Below them, you have the inner circle, the people we mentioned before: generals, ministers, party officials. These people have power, but it's conditional. It depends on their relationship with the supreme leader. It depends on their usefulness, and it can be taken away at any moment. Below that, you have the broader elite, mid-level officials, military officers, scientists and engineers working on important projects, propaganda officials. These people live better than average North Koreans, but they're not part of the real inner circle. They're more expendable. And then you have everyone else, the 25 million North Koreans who have no power, no privileges, and no hope of ever joining the elite. Now, within this system, women have always had a complicated position. In theory, North Korea promotes gender equality. In propaganda, women are shown as equal partners in building socialism. But in reality, North Korea is deeply patriarchal. Real power is held by men. Women can have influence, but usually only through their relationships with powerful men, as wives, as daughters, as sisters. There have been exceptions. Kim Kyung-hui, Kim Jong-il's sister, wielded enormous power for decades. She was a general. She held important party positions. But even she fell from grace eventually, and her power came from being the supreme leader's sister, not from her own achievements. For most elite women in North Korea, power is borrowed. It's temporary, and it's tied to their husband's position. So when the husband dies, the borrowed power disappears, and that's when things get dangerous. To understand what happens to widows, you need to understand North Korea's purge system. Because North Korea doesn't just fire people who fall out of favor. They don't just demote them or force them into retirement. They purge them. And purging in North Korea can mean a lot of things, none of them good. Sometimes, purging means execution, a quick death, a public or private execution, depending on the circumstances. Kim Jong-un has executed hundreds of officials since taking power in 2011. Some were killed with anti-aircraft guns, others by firing squad. The methods are brutal and meant to send a message. Sometimes, purging means prison camps. North Korea has a vast network of political prison camps. These aren't regular prisons. These are labor camps where people are sent to die slowly, where they're worked to death, starved, tortured, where entire families are imprisoned together because of one person's supposed crime. Sometimes, purging means disappearance. The person is arrested quietly. No announcement, no trial. They just vanish. Their family doesn't know where they are. They can't ask questions. They just have to accept that their loved one is gone. And sometimes, purging means forced relocation. The person isn't killed or imprisoned, but they're sent away from Pyongyang, sent to some remote province, stripped of their privileges, forced to live like ordinary North Koreans, which, after years of living in luxury, is its own kind of punishment. Now, when a powerful man dies naturally, in his bed, from old age or illness, you might think his family would be safe. After all, he didn't do anything wrong. He served the regime loyally. He died in good standing. But that's not how it works. Because his widow is now a problem. She knows secrets. She was present at private meetings. She heard conversations that weren't meant for anyone outside the inner circle. She knows who said what, who disagreed with whom, who's loyal and who's pretending. And in a regime that's paranoid about loyalty, that's dangerous knowledge. So the regime has to decide what to do with her. Can she be trusted to stay quiet? Does she have allies who will protect her? Does she have children who are useful to the regime? Or is she expendable? And more often than not, the answer is, she's expendable. Let's talk about a specific case, Sung Hae-rim. She's one of the most tragic figures in the history of North Korea's elite, and her story shows exactly what we're talking about. Sung Hae-rim was an actress, a beautiful, talented actress who caught the eye of Kim Jong-il back in the 1960s. Kim Jong-il was the son of Kim Il-sung, the founder of North Korea. He was being groomed to take over the country, and he became obsessed with Sung Hae-rim. There was just one problem. She was already married. She had a child from that marriage. But Kim Jong-il didn't care. When the son of the supreme leader wants something, he gets it. So Sung Hae-rim was forced to divorce her husband, and she became Kim Jong-il's mistress. Now, she couldn't be his official wife. Kim Jong-il was already married to another woman, Kim Young-suk, in an arranged marriage approved by his father. But Sung Hae-rim was his favorite, his true love, according to some accounts. And in 1971, she gave birth to a son, Kim Jong-nam, Kim Jong-il's first son. For years, Sung Hae-rim lived in luxury. She had her own compound, servants, everything she wanted. Kim Jong-il visited her regularly. She was protected, safe, untouchable. But she was also hidden, because Kim Il-sung, the supreme leader, didn't approve of this relationship. He didn't like that his son was with an actress. He didn't like that she was divorced. He didn't like that Kim Jong-il had a son with her instead of with his official wife. So Sung Hae-rim's existence was kept secret. She couldn't appear in public with Kim Jong-il. She couldn't attend official functions. She lived in a golden cage. And then, in the 1990s, everything fell apart. Kim Jong-il started paying less attention to her. He had other women, other mistresses. And Sung Hae-rim fell into depression. She started drinking. She had mental health problems. She became difficult to manage.
And in the eyes of the regime, she became a liability. In 2002, Sung Hae-rim died in Moscow. She'd been sent there years earlier, supposedly for medical treatment. But really, she was exiled, removed from North Korea because she was no longer useful, because she was embarrassing, because she knew too much and wasn't stable enough to be trusted. She died alone in a foreign country, separated from her son, forgotten by the man who once loved her. Her death was barely acknowledged in North Korea. No official announcement, no funeral. She just disappeared from history. And her son, Kim Jong-un? He was supposed to be Kim Jong-il's successor, but he fell out of favor too. He was caught trying to sneak into Japan to visit Disneyland using a fake passport. It embarrassed the regime, so he was passed over. His younger brother, Kim Jong-un, became the heir instead. Kim Jong-un lived in exile in Macau and Malaysia for years, and in 2017, he was assassinated in Kuala Lumpur airport. 2 women smeared VX nerve agent on his face. He died within minutes. And most people believe Kim Jong-un ordered the assassination, his own half-brother, killed because he might have been a threat, because he might have been used by foreign governments as an alternative leader. So Sung Hae-rim's story is a perfect example of what happens when you're connected to the Kim family but not protected by them. You can have years of luxury, years of safety, but the moment you're no longer useful, the moment you become a problem, you're disposed of, exiled, forgotten, erased. Now let's talk about another case. This one involves Kim Kyung-hui, Kim Jong-il's sister, and her husband, Jong Sung-faek. This is one of the most dramatic purges in recent North Korean history, and it shows how even the most powerful families aren't safe. Kim Kyung-hee was born into power. She's the daughter of Kim Il-sung, the sister of Kim Jong-il, the aunt of Kim Jong-un. For decades, she was one of the most powerful women in North Korea. She held the rank of general in the military. She was a senior party official. She had real influence. Her husband, Jong Sung-taek, was also powerful. He wasn't born into the Kim family, but he married into it, and he used that connection to become one of the most important men in the country. He was a vice chairman of the National Defense Commission. He was Kim Jong-un's regent when Kim Jong-un first took power, helping the young, inexperienced leader navigate the complex world of North Korean politics. Jong Sung-taek had his hands in everything: the economy, foreign relations. He led trade delegations to China. He managed important economic projects. He was, in many ways, the second most powerful man in North Korea, after Kim Jong-un himself. But power in North Korea is dangerous, and Jong Sung-taek made enemies. Maybe he was too powerful. Maybe he was too independent. Maybe he challenged Kim Jong-un's authority. Or maybe Kim Jong-un just saw him as a threat, a rival who might try to take power for himself. In December 2013, Jong Sung-taek was arrested. It happened dramatically. He was dragged out of a party meeting by security guards while the entire leadership watched. It was meant to be humiliating, a public display of his fall from grace. He was accused of a long list of crimes: corruption, factionalism,
plotting to overthrow the state, womanizing, drug use. The charges were probably exaggerated or completely made up. But in North Korea, it doesn't matter if the charges are true. What matters is that the supreme leader wants you gone. Jang Song-taek was executed within days, shot by firing squad. Some reports said he was torn apart by dogs, though those reports were probably exaggerated propaganda. But either way, he was dead. A man who'd been one of the most powerful in the country, who'd been married to Kim Jong-un's aunt, who'd helped raise Kim Jong-un, was executed like a common criminal. And what happened to Kim Kyung-hee? She's the supreme leader's aunt. She's Kim Il-sung's daughter. You'd think she'd be protected, untouchable, but she wasn't. After her husband's execution, she disappeared from public view. For years, there were rumors that she'd been killed too, or that she'd committed suicide, or that she was in prison, or that she'd had a mental breakdown. The truth seems to be that she was placed under house arrest. She was allowed to live, but only because she's family, because she's Kim Jong-un's aunt, and killing her might have been too much even for him. But her power was gone. Her influence was gone. She was no longer seen at official events, no longer part of the leadership. She was effectively erased from public life. In recent years, she's made a few public appearances. She was seen at some official events in 2020 and 2021. But she's a shell of what she once was. She looks frail, she's clearly not in good health, and she has no real power anymore. So even being the daughter of the founding supreme leader, even being the sister of the previous supreme leader, even being the aunt of the current supreme leader, wasn't enough to protect her when her husband fell. She survived, but only barely, and she lost everything else. Now, Kim Kyung-hee isn't technically a widow because her husband was executed rather than dying naturally, but her story illustrates the same point. When the man who gave you power is gone, your protection disappears, your status means nothing, and you're at the mercy of whoever's currently in charge.
Let's talk about the wives of military generals who've been executed, because there have been many of them. Kim Jong-un has been particularly ruthless with the military leadership. He's executed dozens of generals since taking power. Some for real crimes like corruption or incompetence, others simply because he wanted to assert his authority, to show that no one is safe, that everyone serves at his pleasure. When a general is executed in North Korea, it's not just him who suffers. His entire family suffers. This is called guilt by association, or 3 generations of punishment. It's a North Korean policy that says if you commit a political crime, your parents, your spouse, and your children are also guilty. All of you will be punished. So when a general is executed, his wife doesn't just lose her husband, she loses her freedom. She's arrested too, and usually so are her children, her parents if they're still alive, sometimes even her siblings. They're all sent to political prison camps, places like Camp 15, Camp 16, Camp 25. These camps are hidden in the mountains of northern North Korea. They're massive. Some hold tens of thousands of prisoners, and the conditions are horrific. Prisoners work from sunrise to sunset, mining, logging, farming. They're given minimal food, a few handfuls of corn per day. Many starve to death. They're beaten for the smallest infractions. They're tortured during interrogations. They're subjected to public executions when someone tries to escape or breaks a rule. And there's no release. When you're sent to a political prison camp in North Korea, you're there for life. You don't get a trial. You don't get a sentence with an end date. You're there until you die. So the wives of executed generals, women who once lived in luxury, who had servants and drivers and nice homes, end up in prison camps. They go from eating imported food to eating corn mixed with sawdust, from wearing designer clothes to wearing rags, from having power to having nothing.
And their children suffer the same fate. Kids who were born into privilege, who went to elite schools, who had everything, are suddenly prisoners. They're guilty of nothing except having the wrong father. But in North Korea, that's enough. There are testimonies from defectors who escaped from these camps, people who witnessed the arrival of elite families after a purge. They describe how these women and children would arrive in trucks, confused and terrified, how they'd be forced to strip and be searched, how they'd be assigned to barracks, how they'd be told they were now prisoners for life because of their husband's or father's crimes. One defector described seeing the wife of an executed general arrive at the camp. She'd been a beautiful woman, well-dressed, well-fed. Within months, she was unrecognizable, thin, covered in sores, her hands destroyed from hard labor, her spirit broken. Another defector described children from elite families arriving at the camps, kids who'd never worked a day in their lives, who'd been pampered and protected, who suddenly had to mine coal or chop wood for 12 hours a day. Many of them didn't survive long. They weren't prepared for the brutality. They got sick, they had accidents, they died. This is what happens to the wives and children of executed generals. This is the system, and it's designed to terrorize the elite, to make sure that everyone in the leadership knows that if they step out of line, it's not just them who will suffer. Their entire family will be destroyed. Not all widows end up in prison camps. Some just disappear. And in some ways, that's even more terrifying, because no one knows what happened to them. There's no closure, no confirmation of death. They just vanish.
There have been numerous cases over the years of elite women who disappeared after their husbands died or fell out of favor. One day, they're living in their compound in Pyongyang. The next day, they're gone. Their house is empty, their servants are reassigned, and no one will talk about what happened. Some of these women might have been executed quietly. Others might have been sent to prison camps. Others might have been relocated to remote areas and forced to live in obscurity. But their families don't know, and they can't ask, because asking questions about disappeared people in North Korea is dangerous. It suggests you're questioning the regime, and that can get you purged too. There's a culture of silence around these disappearances. People know better than to talk about them. Even among the elite, you don't mention someone who's been disappeared. You pretend they never existed. You erase them from your memory. This creates a climate of fear, because if you're an elite woman in North Korea, you look at these disappearances and you realize that could be you. If your husband dies, if he falls out of favor, if the regime decides you're a problem, you could vanish too, and no one would say a word. No one would ask what happened to you. You'd just be gone. And your children would learn not to mention you. Your friends would pretend they never knew you. The propaganda would erase your image from photos, your name from documents. You'd become a non-person, someone who never existed. This is psychological warfare. It's a way of controlling the elite, of making sure they stay loyal, of making sure they never question the regime, because the consequences aren't just death. The consequences are erasure, complete and total removal from existence. One reason widows are so vulnerable is because of North Korea's surveillance system. The regime watches everyone, but especially the elite, because the elite are the ones with the means and the knowledge to cause problems. Every elite compound in Pyongyang has security agents assigned to it. These agents aren't just protecting the residents, they're watching them, monitoring their activities, reporting back to the Ministry of State Security. Phone calls are monitored, mail is read, visitors are recorded, every movement is tracked. And it's not just official surveillance. Regular people are encouraged to inform on each other. Your servant might be reporting on you. Your driver might be an agent. Your neighbor might be writing reports about your behavior. This surveillance intensifies when someone in your family falls out of favor or dies. Suddenly, there are more agents around, more questions being asked, more pressure. And widows are particular targets, because the regime wants to know if they're complaining, if they're speaking negatively about the supreme leader, if they're in contact with anyone suspicious, if they're trying to leave the country. One wrong word can be enough. One complaint about how you're being treated. One expression of grief that sounds like criticism. One attempt to contact someone outside the official channels, and you're marked as a problem. There are stories of widows who were arrested because they cried too much at their husband's funeral, because excessive grief was interpreted as criticism of the regime. The logic being, if you're that sad your husband is dead, maybe you're sad because the regime killed him. And if you think the regime killed him, that means you don't trust the supreme leader. And if you don't trust the supreme leader, you're an enemy.
It's twisted logic, but it's the kind of paranoid thinking that dominates North Korea's security apparatus. So widows learn to be careful. They learn to control their emotions, to watch what they say, to avoid doing anything that might be interpreted as suspicious. They live in constant fear of surveillance, constant fear that one mistake will lead to their arrest. Not every elite widow meets a terrible fate. There are exceptions, women who manage to survive and maintain some level of status after their husbands died. But these cases are rare, and they usually involve specific circumstances. The most important factor is family connections. If a widow has her own powerful family, separate from her husband's position, she might be protected. If her father or brother is a high-ranking official, if she has other relatives who can vouch for her loyalty, she might be allowed to live quietly. Another factor is usefulness. If the widow has skills or knowledge that the regime values, she might be kept around. Maybe she's a skilled propagandist. Maybe she's a scientist. Maybe she has expertise in some area that's valuable. If she can continue to serve the regime in some capacity, she might be allowed to survive. A third factor is obscurity. If the widow manages to fade into the background, to become unimportant enough that no one pays attention to her, she might survive simply by being forgotten. This usually means accepting a massive downgrade in lifestyle, moving out of the elite compounds, living like a regular citizen. But at least she's alive. There have been a few cases of widows who managed to maintain their positions after their husbands died. Usually, these were women whose husbands died of natural causes, while still in good standing with the regime. Women whose husbands were loyal until the end. Women who made it clear they supported the regime and would continue to do so.
But even these women lost status. They might keep their homes, they might keep some privileges, but they're no longer invited to important events. They're no longer part of the inner circle. They're moved to the periphery, tolerated but not trusted, allowed to exist but not to participate. And they live with the constant knowledge that this tolerance could be revoked at any moment, that if they say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing, attract the wrong kind of attention, they could be purged just like the others. So even the lucky ones aren't really lucky. They're just living in a slightly more comfortable prison, always watching their backs, always afraid. Let's talk about what this does to people psychologically, because living under this kind of fear, this kind of uncertainty, this kind of constant threat, it destroys you mentally. Elite women in North Korea grow up knowing the rules. They know that their position is precarious. They know that their safety depends on their husband's continued favor with the supreme leader. They know that everything can change in an instant. So they live in a state of perpetual anxiety. Every time there's a purge, every time someone they know disappears, they wonder if they're next. Every time the phone rings unexpectedly, every time there's a knock on the door, they panic. This constant stress causes real psychological damage. Depression, anxiety disorders, paranoia. Some women develop physical symptoms, insomnia, digestive problems, heart palpitations. Their bodies are literally breaking down from the stress, and there's no one they can talk to about it. You can't see a therapist in North Korea and talk about your fear of being purged.
You can't confide in friends because any of them might inform on you. You can't even talk to your own children because you don't want to burden them or say something that they might accidentally repeat. So you're isolated, alone with your fear, pretending everything is fine while internally falling apart. And if your husband does die or fall out of favor, the psychological impact is even worse, because now it's not just fear, it's reality. You're watching your life fall apart. You're losing your home, your status, your security, and you have no control over any of it. Some women become completely broken by this. They shut down emotionally, stop talking, stop eating, just wait for whatever's going to happen to happen. They're already dead inside before anything physical happens to them. Others fight. They try to maintain their dignity. They try to protect their children. They try to find a way to survive. But the system is designed to break even the strongest people, and most of them eventually break. We need to talk about the children, because when a widow suffers, her children suffer with her, and these kids often have the hardest time of all. Children of the elite in North Korea are raised with enormous privilege. They attend special schools, they have private tutors, they travel abroad sometimes. They eat food that regular North Korean kids have never heard of. They wear clothes from foreign countries. They live in a completely different world from the average North Korean child. But they're also raised with the knowledge that all of this depends on their father's position. They know that if something happens to their father, everything could change. It's a knowledge that hangs over their entire childhood. When their father falls out of favor or dies, these kids watch their entire world collapse. Their friends stop talking to them. They're pulled out of their elite schools. They're moved out of their nice homes. They lose everything.
And if their father was executed or purged, they're arrested too, sent to prison camps with their mother. These kids, who've never experienced hardship, who've been pampered their entire lives, suddenly find themselves doing hard labor, mining, farming, logging, 12 hours a day, on minimal food, in terrible conditions. Many of them don't survive. They get sick, they have accidents, they can't handle the physical demands. They die in the camps, buried in unmarked graves, forgotten. The ones who do survive are traumatized for life. They've lost their father, their mother is broken, their siblings might be dead. They've experienced starvation, violence, cruelty, and they carry that trauma forever. And even if they somehow get out, even if they manage to defect years later, they're never the same. The psychological scars are permanent. There are testimonies from defectors who were children of purged elites, who spent years in prison camps. They describe the horror, the confusion, the betrayal. They trusted the system. They believed in the regime. Their parents served the regime loyally, and then the regime destroyed them anyway. It creates a deep cynicism, a complete loss of faith in authority, in justice, in the idea that doing the right thing will protect you, because they did nothing wrong, their parents did nothing wrong, and they were punished anyway. A small number of widows and children of purged officials have managed to escape North Korea. Their stories provide some of the clearest evidence of what we've been talking about. Defecting from North Korea is incredibly difficult. It's even harder if you're from the elite, because you're watched more closely, you have more to lose, and you're less prepared for the hardships of escape.
Most North Korean defectors are from the border regions. They're poor. They're used to hardship. They cross the river into China and make their way to South Korea through an underground network. But elite defectors are different. They have to plan carefully. They need money, which they usually have. They need connections, which is harder. And they need to avoid detection by security services that are specifically watching for elite defectors. Some elite widows have defected after their husbands were purged or executed. They saw what was coming. They knew they'd be arrested or killed, so they ran. These escapes are dangerous. If you're caught trying to defect from North Korea, you're executed or sent to a prison camp. Your entire family is punished, so it's an all-or-nothing gamble. One case that became public involved the wife of a mid-level official who was executed in the 2000s. After her husband's death, she was placed under house arrest, but she managed to bribe some border guards and cross into China with her daughter. They spent months hiding in China, moving from place to place, terrified of being caught and sent back. Eventually, they made it to South Korea. She gave interviews describing her experience, the fear, the humiliation, the loss. She described how she went from living in comfort to being treated like a criminal overnight, how she watched her daughter suffer, how she made the decision to risk everything on an escape attempt. Another case involved the daughter of an executed general. She was sent to a prison camp with her mother as a teenager. She spent years there. Her mother died in the camp, but she survived, and eventually she managed to escape during a work assignment outside the camp. She fled to China and eventually South Korea.
Her testimony is harrowing. She describes the conditions in the camp, the starvation, the violence, the public executions. She describes watching her mother waste away and die. She describes the guilt of surviving when her mother didn't. These defector testimonies are incredibly important because they provide concrete evidence of what happens to the families of purged officials. The North Korean government denies these things happen. They claim everyone is treated fairly, that there are no political prison camps, that people aren't punished for their relatives' supposed crimes. But the defectors know better. They lived it, and their stories confirm what we're talking about. Being a widow of someone who fell out of favor in North Korea is incredibly dangerous. Your life is essentially over. You either die, disappear, or if you're very lucky and very brave, you escape. The North Korean propaganda system plays a role in all of this too, because the regime doesn't just punish widows and families of purged officials, they erase them from history. North Korean media is entirely controlled by the state. Every newspaper, every TV program, every radio broadcast, it's all propaganda designed to glorify the Kim family and promote the regime's ideology. And part of that propaganda involves rewriting history. When someone is purged, they're not just removed from power, they're removed from the historical record. Their image is edited out of photos, their name is deleted from documents. Any mention of them is scrubbed from media archives. This happened with Jang Song-taek. After his execution, North Korean media went through and removed him from historical footage. There were videos of important events where he'd been standing next to Kim Jong-il or Kim Jong-un. After his purge, those videos were edited. He was airbrushed out. Entire scenes were recut to remove him.
It's Orwellian, literally. It's exactly what happens in the book 1984. People become unpersons. They're erased from existence, and everyone has to pretend they never existed. This extends to families too. The wives and children of purged officials are erased along with them. If there were any photos of them at public events, those photos are destroyed or edited. If there were any mentions of them in official documents, those mentions are removed. So these women don't just lose their status, their freedom, sometimes their lives. They lose their place in history. They become ghosts. No one is allowed to remember them. No one is allowed to acknowledge they existed. And this serves a purpose. It makes the purge complete. It's not enough to kill someone or imprison them. You have to erase all evidence that they ever mattered. That way, the supreme leader's power appears absolute and unchallenged. That way, there's no sympathy for the victims. That way, everyone learns that dissent or failure will result not just in death, but in complete obliteration. North Korea isn't the only authoritarian regime that's treated the families of purged officials harshly, but it's probably the most extreme. In Stalin's Soviet Union, there was a similar system. The families of executed officials were often arrested and sent to gulags. Children were taken from their parents and placed in orphanages where they were taught to denounce their parents as enemies of the state. It was brutal. But even Stalin's purges had limits. Some families were spared. Some children were allowed to grow up and even rejoin society later. And after Stalin died, there was a process of de-Stalinization. Some of the purged officials were posthumously rehabilitated.
Their families were released and allowed to live normal lives.
Nothing like that has ever happened in North Korea. There's been no de-Stalinization, no rehabilitation of purged officials, no release of their families. The system that Kim Il-sung created is still in place, and it's just as brutal as it ever was. In China, under Mao, during the Cultural Revolution, the families of class enemies were persecuted. They were publicly humiliated, sent to rural areas for re-education, forced to do hard labor, but most of them weren't killed. And after the Cultural Revolution ended, many were allowed to return to cities and resume their lives. In North Korea, there's no end to the persecution. If you're sent to a prison camp, you're there for life. If your family is declared guilty by association, that guilt never goes away. Some people compare North Korea to Nazi Germany, the concentration camps, the totalitarian control, the cult of personality around the leader. And there are similarities. But even Nazi Germany didn't have a formal policy of 3 generations of punishment. They punished individuals, and sometimes their immediate families, but not grandparents and grandchildren automatically. North Korea's system is uniquely brutal, and the way it treats widows and children of purged officials is part of that brutality. We should talk about China's role in all this, because China is North Korea's main ally and protector, and China has some responsibility for allowing this system to continue. China provides North Korea with food, fuel, and economic support. Without Chinese aid, North Korea's economy would collapse. The regime would likely fall. So China keeps North Korea afloat. Why? Because China doesn't want a unified Korea allied with the United States. They don't want American troops on their border. They don't want to deal with millions of North Korean refugees fleeing across the border. So they support the regime, despite knowing how brutal it is. And one of the ways this brutality manifests is in how China treats North Korean defectors. When elite defectors, including widows and children of purged officials, make it to China, they're not safe. China has a policy of repatriating North Korean defectors. They catch them and send them back. And when defectors are sent back to North Korea, they're tortured and usually executed, or sent to prison camps. China knows this, but they do it anyway because their agreement with North Korea requires it. There have been cases of elite widows who made it to China only to be caught and sent back. Their fate after return is usually death. So China isn't just passively allowing North Korea's brutal system to continue. They're actively helping enforce it by catching and returning defectors. International human rights organizations have criticized China for this, but China doesn't care. Their strategic interests outweigh human rights concerns, so the system continues. So now you understand why it sucks to be a Kim family widow, or really, why it sucks to be the widow of anyone powerful in North Korea. Your position, your safety, your entire life depends on your husband, and the moment he's gone, whether through natural death or purge, you're vulnerable. You might be arrested and sent to a prison camp, where you'll die slowly from starvation and hard labor. You might be executed quietly. You might disappear without anyone knowing what happened to you. Or if you're very lucky, you might be allowed to fade into obscurity, living in fear and poverty for the rest of your life. Your children will suffer the same fate, guilty by association, punished for having the wrong father, their lives destroyed because of something they had no control over. And even if you manage to escape, even if you make it out of North Korea alive, you'll carry the trauma with you forever. The fear, the loss, the guilt. It never fully goes away. This is the reality of North Korea's system. It's not just about controlling the general population. It's about controlling the elite, too. Making sure that everyone, even the most powerful, knows that their position is temporary, that they serve at the pleasure of the supreme leader, and that if they fall out of favor, everything will be taken from them, not just their power or their life, but their family's future too. It's a system designed to instill absolute fear and absolute loyalty, and it works. Because everyone in North Korea's elite has seen what happens to those who fall. They've seen families disappear. They've seen children sent to prison camps. They've seen powerful men and women reduced to nothing overnight. And that fear keeps the system running. It keeps people loyal even when they might have doubts, because the alternative is too terrible to contemplate. The widows of North Korea's elite are the clearest example of this brutal system. They're the ones who pay the price for their husbands' supposed failures or deaths. They're the ones who lose everything through no fault of their own. They're the ones who suffer in silence, unable to speak out, unable to fight back, unable to do anything but accept their fate. And as long as the Kim dynasty remains in power, as long as North Korea's totalitarian system continues, this will keep happening. More widows will be purged. More families will be destroyed. More children will suffer for their parents' supposed crimes. It's a tragedy that most of the world doesn't see, because North Korea is so closed off, because information is so hard to get, because the regime is so good at hiding its brutality.
But it's happening. Right now, as you're hearing this, there are widows in North Korea living in fear. There are children of purged officials suffering in prison camps. There are families that have been destroyed by this system. And their stories deserve to be told. They deserve to be heard. Because maybe, just maybe, if enough people understand what's happening, if enough pressure is put on the regime, things might change. Probably not soon, probably not in our lifetimes, but maybe eventually. That's the hope, anyway, that telling these stories matters, that remembering these victims matters, that refusing to let them be erased from history matters. Because in North Korea, the regime wants to erase them, to pretend they never existed, to make sure no one remembers what happened to them. But we can remember. We can tell their stories, and we can make sure the world knows what happens to the widows and children of North Korea's elite, what it really means to lose power in one of the most brutal regimes on Earth. Subscribe if you want more deep dives into the hidden truths about North Korea.